makes for a good MLA? Like, what are the things that MLAs do that separate the good MLAs from the weaker MLAs?
Well, we've got lots of, and I think there's different ways of going about it. You know, not my style isn't the same as the style as everyone else, and many of the MLAs do an outstanding job, I think, in representing their constituents. I think you've got to put your constituents first. You know, it's not about being leader first. It's not about being minister first. It's not about your critic area. It's about being an MLA and representing a community. And that's what I think good MLAs do. They stay in touch with their communities. They regularly talk to their communities, meet with their communities. When issues come up in their communities, they raise them in the legislature. I think it's one of the most exciting things about the leadership campaign, which is a little bit similar to that. I think it's that we're going to go out and meet party members. Like, I'm going out. I've visited 22 communities. There'll be 24 in a couple of days. I'm seeing a couple of new communities this week. I'm meeting party members in small groups. I'm billeting in members' homes. And by the end of this campaign, we'll really be able to represent the party, all the candidates, I think, because we'll have met the party, engaged with the party, listened to the party. I think that role of representation should come first. You're an MLA first, you're a minister or a critic second, and if you forget that, then you're not doing your job as MLA.
What needs to be done to enhance education in the province? K-12.
K-12, first of all, I think we have a real problem with class size and composition. I think when I talk to teachers, it's more with composition than class size. We've got 12,000 classrooms that are outside the current class size and composition limits. And that comes down to an issue of funding. So that's the first set of things. We've got to improve the system on class size and composition and ensure that supports for special needs students are there in the system. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is we've got to protect rural schools. I did a lot of work, you know, in saving 3 schools in my community, Carleton, Bruce, and Collingwood schools. And in that process, we did a review of all the schools. The 190 schools have been closed. I think 120 of them under Christy Clark as Minister of Education. And what that showed is that the way the Liberals have changed the funding formula makes it virtually impossible to run a school under 90 people. And this is critical for communities, right? Because, in fact, if you're trying to attract people to your community, if you're in a rural community, and you don't have a good public school in that community, or if you have an elementary school where people have to bus long distances to go to school, that's a real blow, not just to the education of the community, but to the economic heart of the community. I think you've got to involve teachers in the process, treat teachers with respect. I'm in favor of getting rid of those provisions of Bill 33 that stop teachers from negotiating class size and composition. The reality is that when we negotiated those questions with teachers, we had better record in terms of class size and composition than we do now. And so those issues should be on the table. We should be negotiating more than salary and benefits with teachers, that, like everyone else, they should be able to negotiate conditions of work. And finally, I think we've got to get away from the debate around the foundation skills assessment, that we have to move to a system of sampling, which will do all we need to do to judge what's happening in the school system. We have to provide other assessment models for schools because parents want to know how their school is doing and what's going on, but those have to be connected with real resources. I mean, the foundation skills assessment process doesn't do anything to promote public education. I mean, it's a fundraising tool for the Fraser Institute, yeah, but it doesn't do anything to promote public education. And I think if you're going to have a testing model or an assessment model, you should be looking to use that model to improve public schools that perhaps don't have as many resources. And so those are some of the things I'd like to see.
You've talked about rolling back the Campbell corporate tax cuts.
Yes.
He has also introduced huge personal income tax cuts.
Yes.
Some commentators, like Neil Brooks at the Osgoode Hall tax specialist, suggests that maybe we need a new tax bracket at a higher level, let's say $500,000 or something like that. Robert Reich, U.S. economic commentator, has suggested the same things. I'm wondering, if you were to be premier, would you consider introducing surtax on high-income individuals?
It's something to look at. You know, Barack Obama, when he ran for president, set the level at $250,000. The truth of it is, in BC, when you're assessing tax policy, that isn't going to get you a huge amount of revenue. I mean, that's part of the issue there, is that, in fact, a very high threshold for a surtax wouldn't bring you very much revenue.
Or even the highest marginal tax rate, which right now is 14.7%, provincially on top of the 29% federally, kicks in at $128,000 income in British Columbia.
That's right.
Should it be higher?
Well, so those are the issues, right, on that. But what we've seen on the personal tax side is a shift in the way we're collecting taxation from progressive income tax collection taxation on
The
flat
medical
taxes.
service premiums,
So
another area.
50% increase in 2002, 18% the last 3 years. And, you know, those happened on the same day. And, you know, I was asked by someone at the meeting, we met with the Business Council last week. They said, well, how can you win on a proposal of raising taxes? Right? Well, on January 1st this year, the BC Liberals raised taxes. They raised MSP premiums and long-term care fees. And they used that money essentially to subsidize corporate taxes.
Would you cut medical service premiums and cut long-term care fees and increase income taxes?
I've already proposed that we reinstate corporate tax levels at the 2008 levels, and that we roll back the long-term care fee increase. I'm going to look at some of these other questions as well. We haven't stopped talking about those issues. But I think that those tax changes, the ones linked to the carbon tax, and another one, which is the corporation capital tax cut to the banks. This was a tax that had been in place from under the NDP Barrett, under social credit, under the NDP Harcourt Clark, and then under the Campbell Liberals till 2008. It was 2007. It was a $100 million tax. It ensures that banks paid a minimum tax in BC. Since they announced the tax cut, the employment in the banking sector has gone down in BC and up in Ontario. So they gave them a $100 million tax cut, you know, and the result of that was a net drop in employment, even though the finance minister of the day and the Canadian Bankers Association said the reverse would happen. I think banks do very well in BC. They should pay a minimum share as well. So that's another tax cut, recent one, where we'd like to go back to 2008 levels. In that case, linking that to a policy to improve access to post-secondary education. I think that's a good investment for the province to ensure that student grants get restored to at least 2008 levels. I'm going to have more to say on that soon. And that we eliminate interest rates on student loans so that students aren't buried.
Eliminate interest rates?
You bet. It's already very hard to get access to those loans already. So we want to increase access so that students can get ahead. They have a very difficult time getting the loans. The standards will stay high, but that we should use the money from rescinding the tax cut to banks and use it to support students' access to education. I think those ideas, particularly the students who get student loans, tend to be lower income students. This is in the nature of things. And so this will, I think, improve access for some people to post-secondary education and ensure after they're done that they're not facing the kind of crushing debt levels we see. $27,000, average student has a $27,000 debt in BC after they finish their education. Often these days it's much more difficult to get work at that point. And so they're starting way behind. And probably the best time for them to pay for that is when they're earning a higher salary later as a result of their education.
One question that's certainly going to come up if you become the NDP leader is this backdated memo.
Yes.
When you were the principal secretary to Glenn Clark. Some people on our website on straight.com will comment and say, Adrian Dix cannot become premier because Christy Clark or whoever is, you know, Liberals are going to slice them to shreds on this. What's your response to people who have that concern?
My response is I made a mistake. I owned up to it. I paid a price for it. Since then, I was executive director of Canadian Parents for French. We had enormous success funding French second language education. I've been an opposition critic, had great success there. I've been elected twice to the legislature. They raised the issue then. And if the BC Liberal Party attempts, again, to campaign on the 1990s, they are going to be defeated in the next election. I mean, we are going to present a program that is going to contrast to their program. They're a tired, discredited government. They failed on the issues. Christy Clark was probably the worst minister we've had in 25 years. She left politics.
You know why you say that? There have been a lot of ministers.
Well, there have been, but consider the record. I mean, you know, I know some people want to mention, you know, there's some other famous people from the past who didn't do very well, but consider the record. I mean, public education. She was Minister of Education. She was Deputy Premier at that time. And there is nobody, I think, in the education world who thinks she improved the system. Yes, she attacked teachers, but she attacked everybody. And the system was worse off as a result, demonstrably so, after her years as minister. She becomes Minister of Children and Family Development, right? In the spring of 2004.
Like a cup of coffee there.
Well, she was there for 8 months.
Yeah.
You know, that was a critical 8 months, and you just need to read the reviews of that period to understand what a failure the government was in that period. They focused the largest cuts on at-risk children. They used the confidentiality afforded those children to hide the impact of their cuts for a long time. We had to expose it after the fact. So Christy Clark versus me, style versus substance. We made substantive change from the opposition side of children and families. She was minister for 8 months. she failed utterly in a critical issue to do with families. Families first, right? That's her slogan. Well, she was Minister of Children and Families. Then she quit, saying she was leaving politics forever, only to run for mayor of Vancouver, what was it, 8 months later? So that's the record. And I look forward to that debate of style versus substance. I look forward to it.
Did Glenn Clark, as your boss, ask you to backdate the memo?
No, I'm the one responsible, and I take full responsibility for it.
Okay. Final question. You have type 1 diabetes, very challenging disease.
Yeah.
How has it affected you as an elected official?
I think
how you do your job?
I think as a person, it's made me more disciplined than I was before I had it. Strangely enough, I think it's helped me in many respects. I was in great physical shape when I got type 1 diabetes. I was 28, so it was juvenile onset, but I got it much later in life. I was training to run the Seattle Marathon at the time, and I ended up running it the next year after having been diagnosed. So 4 days later, I was supposed to run the Seattle Marathon. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And so what it forces you to do on a daily basis is ensure you eat regularly. It ensures a consistency that wasn't my way before I had it. Strangely enough, I would go without eating. I would be working all the time. I'd do different things. It's forced me to be more disciplined and more thoughtful. I think.
So how often do you test your blood sugar levels every day?
A couple of times a day. I'm not as good as I should be. I inject insulin 3 times a day at the moment. At breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I have long-acting insulin through the day. I think the quality of insulin has improved a little bit since I've become a type 1 diabetic. Since I've had type 1 diabetes, it's improved things. But I think in general, it's also opened me up to a world of people with diabetes who struggle and work, and I understand that world better. It makes me more committed to addressing issues of equality, because look, I've been, since I worked for Glenn Clark when I was diagnosed. I worked with people who were a very caring, very generous workplace, always. I've had good jobs. I've never gone into a grocery store, never in my life, and not bought something because it was too expensive. And really what you're doing with type 1 diabetes is artificially presenting or injecting the insulin that your body would normally produce to digest food. Right? So it's a balance of good food and the insulin. And when you have enough money to buy good food, then you're able, of course, to do that much more easily. But if you were working in a tray line at any of our public hospitals where people's salaries were cut and you had type 1 diabetes, you'd be more likely to go in hospital, more likely to go blind, more likely to lose a limb, and more likely to die earlier. And we've got to change that. I mean, the social determinants of health, how long we live, how we get access to good quality life and good quality food. Those are critical questions in healthcare. And the growing inequality of our problems for people with diabetes, it only, I think, magnifies the differences between people. And we've got to reduce those differences. Healthy societies are more equal societies. All the international evidence
as Premier, what would be your #1 priority then?
To reduce inequality. That's the #1 priority, to ensure that every child has an opportunity to fulfill their dreams in life. Let's give you one really practical example. You know, there's this great study that Harvard researchers went out around the United States and they asked people, they did a study of people who didn't have health care. 40 million people at the time, the numbers vary, it was between 40 and 50 million people. They said, what would you do if you had health care? And many of them say, well, I get my teeth cleaned or my teeth fixed. That's what I'd do if I had health care. Now in BC, we have an American-style system of dental care. So that under the premium assistance limit, children have access to a program called Healthy Kids. But there's dozens of communities in BC, dozens of communities where there's no dentist who takes Healthy Kids clients, right? Because they pay 60% of the dental term. So you have all the children who are below the premium assistance line, many of whom don't have access to good dental care. And then all the children between that line and the low income cutoff, which is generally seen as the poverty line, who have no access at all, no public access. And so the difference between them and everyone else is enormous. And think of it in terms of your life. We know that good dental care extends life. We know this because the evidence tells us this. But it also has a huge effect on quality of life, on getting jobs, you know, on interviews, on whether you work in the front of the store or the back of the store. And that's why we've got to extend and reduce these inequalities in our society, which are growing. And this government has been reprehensible on this question. The minimum wage has been lowered, right? HE members were laid off and their salaries reduced. We've seen a dramatic increase in inequality. And as Premier, I'd do something about that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I've been speaking to Adrian Dix, the NDP leadership candidate, and also the NDP MLA for Vancouver Kingsway.